Hey guys, it's Brienne from the Happy Doxy, and I'm so excited to share this tutorial with you for this fun Galaxy cup. I've adopted a few different techniques that I've been playing around with and really love the final product. This cup is finished with CrystaLac Brite Tone, however, all of the same steps can be followed if you're an epoxy user. Just finish it with epoxy instead of Brite Tone. Check out the video description for all of the products that I use, as well as the timestamps for the different parts of the tutorial. And don't forget to show some love by liking and subscribing. All right, let's get started with our Galaxy tutorial. Let's make a Galaxy tumbler, part 1. First thing we need to do is a black base. I'm using CrystaLac Products, but if you want to use spray paint, you can. Just make sure you gas off for 24 hours before moving on to the next step. I'm starting with a cup that has been sanded well. This one has a coat of universal white over it, but you can start with a plain stainless steel cup that's been sanded. We're going to be using black gloss to get our beautiful base coat, but since it's transparent, it's going to look best if we start by using an opaque paint in a dark gray color. I'm using the Slate Gray Flippin' Awesome paint by CrystaLac, which is perfect as the base layer for black gloss. Apply with a fluffy blush brush, being sure not to overwork it, just getting even coverage around the cup, and let it spin for an hour and then dry for another 3 hours. Next, we're ready to start our black gloss. Don't worry if your gray layer didn't get full coverage. The black gloss is going to fill in all of the gaps. Apply it in a thin layer around the cup. I try to get it onto the cup first on that first rotation, and then I smooth it out during the second rotation, and then walk away. This first layer is going to look pretty streaky, but it's going to level out as it spins, and the second coat's going to cover anything that's left. Let your cup spin for an hour, dry for another 3 hours in between your coats. Finally, we're going to do our second coat of black gloss. You can see that the first layer has some lighter areas poking through, but as soon as I get this second coat on, everything looks beautifully smooth. Apply it the same way you did as your other coat, letting it dry for 4 hours. You may need a third coat, but as you can see here, I have a smooth, full coverage base in just 2 layers, and now I'm ready to move on to the next step. For part 2 of our Galaxy tumbler, we're going to add our stars over our black base coat. For this step, you're going to need an old toothbrush, a toothpick, and some white paint. Of course, I'm using universal white from CrystaLac, but you can also use their white Flippin' Awesome paint or a good quality acrylic paint. Put a small amount into a container that's shallow enough to be able to dip your toothbrush into. The bottom of the condiment cup lids work perfectly. Also, make sure your workspace is covered really well, because this method is literally flinging paint. And if you haven't used this technique before, I do recommend practicing over some paper first, just to get an idea of how the paint behaves when you flick it. You're going to use your thumb and pull against the bristles of the brush, and then slowly pull your thumb towards you to release the bristles, which is going to fling the paint. We want to start small and build as we go, so lightly dab your toothbrush into the paint and then blot it a couple times on some paper, which will remove any excess. Hold the brush about an inch above your cup and then tilt it slightly toward it, and slowly flick your paint onto the cup in different areas. For this first go, we're just trying to get a bunch of little dots splattered all around to resemble the scattering stars that make up the galaxies. So keeping things slow with light pressure is going to help achieve this look. Remember, it's always easier to add more than it is to try and take away, but if you aren't liking the way it's looking, you can just wipe it off with a baby wipe and start again. After we've got the scattered stars around the cup, we can then load the brush with a heavier amount of paint and use a bit more force to create larger splatters around the cup. This is going to give it a really nice dimensional look. The further away the brush, the larger the area of stars are going to cover, and the closer you hold it, the more condensed the pattern's going to be. Again, you can practice with some paper first, changing the way how far away you hold the brush, how much paint you use, how fast you flick it, just to see what each effect has. Finally, take a toothpick or a metal dotting tool and dip it into your paint, and then dot it around your cup to create larger, more pronounced stars everywhere around the cup. You can space them out however you want, and you can even use the dotting method to replicate the constellations. Once you have your stars how you like them, allow your cup to hang dry for 4 hours before moving. Part 3 of our Galaxy tutorial will be laying down the base for our colorful galaxy areas. For this part, we're going to be using alcohol ink, which should always be used in a well-ventilated area and with proper respirator. So please make sure you protect yourself before you start this step. I also wear a glove on my active hand both to avoid skin exposure and skin stains. The secret ingredient for this step is pearl alcohol ink. This is from Pinata, and while the pearl mixative from Tim Holtz can get the job done, I don't think it works as well. If you don't have pearl, you can use white, but you're not going to get that same shimmery look. Then we're going to be using these felt applicator pads. You can usually find them near the alcohol ink supplies in your local craft store or on Amazon. We'll use them to apply and blend the inks, and I like to have one for each color. We're also going to be using 90% or higher isopropyl alcohol. Our first step is going to be adding the pearl ink around the cup for the base of our Galaxies. Make sure you shake it really well before using. This is going to give a shimmery metallic base for the colors to pop out and stand out from the black. If you're using white, you'll apply it the same way. Always add the ink to your applicator and not straight onto the cup, and then dab it into the area, starting in the middle and then blending it out so that it fades a bit. You might want to first dab 2 different areas to distribute the ink and then blend each of those areas out with what's left on the applicator. You can make them as large or as small as you want. I usually shoot for around the size of a quarter, and I keep them as irregular shapes. If you're having issues with the ink blending, you can then add a small amount of 90% or higher rubbing alcohol to your applicator and then go back over the area. It's going to reactivate the ink so that you can spread it out more. Never apply the alcohol directly to your cup, or it's going to basically create a void of color that can be really hard to blend back out. I'm going to speed up the video. We're just going to keep moving around the cup, adding more ink as we need it, with the goal to have a more concentrated ink towards the middle of the blob and then a lighter fading of it around that. Use that extra rubbing alcohol to your advantage and just keep blending. I also like to make 1 or 2 longer areas at a diagonal on the cup, which is going to give you some room to create some really colorful spots. And don't forget about the bottom of your cup. Finally, we're going to add a drop or 2 of both our pearl and our rubbing alcohol onto the applicator to get a more diluted color, and then blot a few little spots of that around the cup. They're going to stay as plain pearl. We won't be adding color over these smaller spots, and they will provide some great dimension. Once we have our pearl applied how we like it, we are ready to move on to our next step of adding our colors. We are now ready for part 4 of our Galaxy tutorial, adding the different colors. I'll list out each of the inks that I use as I go through them, and we'll also stick them in the comments. To start, I like to get 2 different shades of each color that I'm using. So for this one, I'm doing pinks, purples, blues, and greens. Starting with my pink, I'm using Senorita Magenta and Sangria, both from Pinata. Using a clean felt tip applicator, I'm going to apply a few drops of one of the pinks and then apply it onto the pearl section from our last step. We'll use the same method we did with our pearl. Start by dabbing in the center of the section to get a more concentrated color, and then just keep dabbing to feather and blend the color out around the area. The pearl lays a good foundation for this step because the color won't show against the black base, so the color will be easier to blend out in the areas with less pearl coverage. I fill about half the area with my first color, and then I grab my second color to blend around the remaining pearl, overlapping the 2 just a bit. This is going to add some really natural color depth to the spots and plays with how beautifully alcohol ink likes to blend together. And then you can also go in with your 90% or higher rubbing alcohol to assist with that blending. Once I'm happy with that spot, I'm going to move to another, still using my 2 different pinks and some rubbing alcohol to deposit and blend the color over the pearl. Next, I'm going to do a couple areas using my blue inks. I'm using Baja blue and Sapphire blue from Pinata. You can also use multiple colors within one of the pearl spots, and that's what I do for the larger areas. I start with the blue and apply it over the area, and then I grab my pink applicator and blend some of that in. Make sure you're switching out the different applicators with each color change. And then a really fun technique is to add some pearl over the colors once you've got a few of them down. Add a few drops of pearl to your applicator and then dab it over your color. It's going to lighten up some of it, and it makes it a really neat cloudy look that I just think makes this technique that much more realistic. You can just keep building your colors over one another and just keep playing around with it until you get the look that you like. Next up is green. I'm using lime green and Rainforest green from Pinata. I like these 2 together because of the contrast between the light and the dark of the 2 shades, and then you can see how pretty they blend together when I add some of the pearl over them. Our last color is purple. I'm using Eggplant and Wild Plum from Holz. I do very much prefer Pinata brand inks. I think they're vibrant and I love the color selection, but Holz is my second favorite. Finally, I'm going to just go around the cup and add some finishing touches. I add a few extra colors to some of the area to give it some contrast, and then blend some of the areas with more pearl to give it extra shimmer. And as I mentioned in the last step, we are going to leave the smaller pearl areas as just plain pearl without any color. Once we're happy with the look, we're going to let this cup sit for 24 hours to give our alcohol inks time to fully gas off and allow the ink to set before we move on. Part 5 of our Galaxy tumbler will be adding the finishing touches to our design, including some mica powder and glitter. My alcohol inks have dried for 24 hours, and if you've followed me for a while, this next step might have your head spinning a bit, but we're going to seal our cup with CrystaLac's glitter glue. So generally speaking, you do not want to seal alcohol inks with a water-based product. Even some spray paints can cause the inks to discolor and run. Really, you want to use Camar varnish. That said, this design won't be impacted if the ink runs a little, since overall we want the colors to blend and meld together. Because this design only has ink over a small area of the cup, we let that ink dry well, and we're using a very thin layer of glitter glue. We are also minimizing the possibility for issues. However, if you want to seal with Camar varnish, you can do so at this point, and then just pick this tutorial up right here after it's had 48 hours to gas off. Okay, so we're gonna brush a thin layer of undiluted glitter glue over our cup using a dry brush. You do not want to bring any extra water to this party. This is going to act as both a sealer for the inks and as an adhesive for our glitter and micas, so apply it evenly around the cup, but you don't need to worry too much about visible brush strokes. Next, I'm going to use both a fine and chunky glitter to give the cup a little bit of shimmery stars. Starting with the fine glitter, I use the seasoning approach to sprinkle it lightly around the cup and give it some overall sparkle, and then I hold my hand closer to the cup and apply more concentrated and small lines to resemble the bands of stars. I'll add the chunky at the end of this step. We're also going to dry brush some mica powder around the colored spots of our cup. I'm using different colors that resemble my inks, but you can really use as few or many micas as you want. I use a fluffy eyeshadow brush, but any small paintbrush will do. Dip your brush into the powder and then tap off most of the excess. Then just lightly dab the mica in different areas around the cup, right around those alcohol ink spots. You can blow on it to spread it out some, or dab it with your finger to blend. This technique adds a bit of shimmer, but it also resembles that space haze cloudiness that you see in photos of the galaxy and just really brings the look to life. At this point, the glue may be drying out a bit, but it dries tacky, and that's going to be just enough to grab onto our mica powders. Finally, I use one of those magic color shift powders to dab around the different areas that we had left as plain pearl and use my fingers to lightly blend. And then finally, we're going to add tiny spots of glitter glue using a small paintbrush sporadically around the cup, and add a single piece of that chunky glitter to each spot for some larger stars. We're going to let this dry for 2 hours before we move on to our final steps. Part 6 of our Galaxy tutorial, and we have just a few steps to finish our cup. First, we're going to add a second layer of glitter glue to our tumbler, which is going to create a good barrier for the alcohol inks so that they aren't exposed to any water from the Brite tone, and it'll also seal the glitter and mica that we added in our last step. Once the glitter glue has dried for 2 hours, we can start with our Brite tone. For the first layer of Brite tone, I'm going to add a few spots of the Galaxy Color Shift Liquid Mica from CrystaLac. This is an optional step, but it gives some extra dimension to the final design. It has a neat purple-blue color shift against the black base, and after adding a thin layer of Brite tone to my cup, I just spread small drops of it around the cup with my finger, similar to doing a Milky Way swirl. Let that dry for 4 hours, and then continue to add your Brite tone layers, allowing 4 hours to dry between each layer. After 4 layers of Brite tone, I'm going to let my cup dry for 8 hours, and then I'm going to lightly sand my cup to knock down any high points from the glitter by using 400 Grit Sandpaper. Make sure you clean off your sanding dust. I spray it down with water and then wipe with a microfiber cloth. Then add another few layers of Brite tone to finish the cup. If you're adding decals, you can do that once your cup is smooth, and if you aren't, just make sure you have at least 6 total layers of Brite tone on your cup and at least 3 layers from your last sand. And here is our final cup. This technique does involve a few different products and a handful of steps, but the final results are definitely worth it. You can play around with your colors, the size of your galaxies, and how you use the micas to create different looks and really unique cups. I hope you guys found this tutorial helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. And don't forget to like and subscribe and check out the links in the description, which will help support me making more tutorials for you.